people are interested in general in like C-star and the small like dwarf processing.
The content of this meeting is being sent to a third party.
Okay,
A
yeah,
lot of third parties. Okay, and we are live.
you're live. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending tonight in spite of the comet being out there. And no aurores tonight, but there is still stuff going on out there. So tonight I'm going to talk about the Veil Nebula mosaic that I took while I was up at Cherry Springs last month. And uh, I'm going to start out with a presentation at first and then do sort of a quasi-live processing. I'll show you sort of the steps. Obviously, there were four panels, so if I sat and processed them all, it would definitely run longer than the allocated time for the meeting. But I can show you one, um, and then the rest would follow, and then show you the mosaic part, because I think that's the part that people are also interested in, is how this gets kind of aligned and and pasted together or combined. So I'm going to share my screen here, and so that one over there, that's good.
Yeah. See the
And
slides.
then so you can see this presenter view.
Yeah, we see the next slide too.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to turn that off. I see it on the other side. Let me hide presenter view. Oh, no, see, now it's on the wrong screen.
Uh,
Let me try moving PowerPoint to the other side. Hold
yeah.
on. Maybe it'll be smart and say, "Oh, I'll use the other screen." Nope. It
There's
doesn't.
button checked. Use prevent presenter view. When if you close this out, go back.
I'm sorry, say again.
If you go back to where you had it, there was a button at the top that says use prevent presenter view and it's checked. You see it in the top middle of your screen there? Not, I can't see it, but there, yep. So go to the middle, it says monitor automatic, top middle. Go right,
Automatic.
go right
Oh,
there.
I got it.
Now go down one. It says use presenter mode. There you go. And then you can pick your monitor too. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, so let's get rid of that. Primary monitor. Ta-da!
Hey, good job.
We got it. Thank you.
Perfect.
And let me get the panel out of the way. Okay. So this is processing the Veil Nebula. So what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to do an overview of the project, what motivated me to do this, what equipment did I use, how did I plan it, my previous experience with mosaic images, and then how I went about doing it, and then an arguably more common approach after I started to do some research into this after I kind of finished, and then a processing demonstration, and then a series of links and stuff to learn more about this particular topic, like mosaic image processing, but also this arguably more common approach. So initially, I had the impetus behind this was that the Veil Nebula has been one of my favorite objects to look at for a long time. I had an experience back in 1999 at the first Black Forest Star Party up at Cherry Springs, where a guy next to me had a 24-inch Dob, and I had my 10-inch LX200, and he was very generous with his eyepiece time, and the first object that I looked through on that scope was he called me over and he said does anyone want to see the Veil Nebula with an O3 filter? So I was right next to him and I said, sure. So I climbed up the ladder, and it was just spectacular. We were looking at kind of the Western Veil, and then we moved down to the Eastern Veil, and it was just kind of blew my mind. I didn't want to come off the ladder. And ever since then, I've just always had a fascination with this supernova remnant. So I've imaged it throughout the years, even with my old DSLRs and stuff like that. And it leaves something to be desired a lot of time, you know, depending on the conditions, depending on the equipment. But last year at Blue Mountain Vista, I decided to try to image it with kind of my newer equipment, since I had graduated from using a DSLR and to a dedicated astronomical camera. And this was the result I got, which I was very happy with. This is about 6 hours worth of data, almost 7 hours worth of data. So it's a lot of data. I just kind of let the scope run one night on this object. It was nice and high in the sky, as it typically is. And this is with my TV85 with the 0.8x focal reducer, the 2600, I mean, MC Pro, the cooled astronomical camera, APS-C format. And then the ASI Air Plus, the AM5, that mount I had just gotten back then, and then my guide scope. So this was done over 2 nights and about 6 hours worth of data. On that same outing up at Blue Mountain, I had the van, so I stayed over a couple nights. I decided to do the Eastern Veil with the same equipment, except I had actually swapped out the guide camera. But for other reasons, I was using the original guide camera for, I decided to do some planetary imaging with my 9 1/4 while I was shooting this. But anyway, and then I looked at these and I thought, oh, there's like a reasonable amount of overlap up at the top there. This fuzzy stuff here is the same as this fuzzy stuff. And I thought, oh, I wonder how they line up. And this is not merged. This is literally just taking Photoshop and like sticking them next to one another, just see kind of what it would look like. And that appealed to me. It's sort of like, oh, wow, that would be beautiful to get in one image. So that was really what was behind the motivation for doing this up at Cherry Springs. I used almost identical equipment. The only difference was I have a smaller guide scope now because I use my 60mm guide scope on my 9 1/4, and I just kind of have that dedicated to that. And I have a little 32mm guide scope that works better with this because it's just smaller, and I don't need the focal length of the 60mm. So this is my old TV85. This goes back to serial number 3. So back, I bought this, I don't know, 20-something years ago, 25 years ago, something like that. So it goes back quite a bit, back into the late 90s. And the 0.8x flattener is here. I have a filter drawer, but the filter is just a clear glass filter. I was in a dark sky site and I wanted to get true colors, so I just have a piece of they're called ODW filters. It stands for an optical distance worker. So it basically is just the same thickness as other filters you would use, so that you don't have to refocus.
Barry's doing his talk on the Veil Nebula now.
And guiding, I have the William Optics 32mm unit guide, the 120mm focal length, the little ZWO ASI 120mm, the little monochrome mini that fits right in there. The mount is the AM5, and then the acquisition is done with the ASI Air Plus. This is the other side of that setup. You can see it a little better now in terms of the OTA. In terms of planning the Mosaic, I use the ASI Air, and you don't really need to do it this way, but I had never done it this way. I had done one other Mosaic previously that I just kind of put them next to one another. I just sort of framed it that way, and I thought, well, let me try the Mosaic planning feature in the ASI Air to just see how it works. And so I put my sort of target in the center of the screen, And then I went up to this Mosaic button and I said, I want to do 2 panes of X, 2 panes of Y. It defaults to, I think, 10%, but I had heard somewhere that sometimes 10% can get a little tight or misalignment, and it only lets you do increments of 5%. So I moved it to 15. 20 seemed like way too much because this stuff tracks pretty accurately, even with dithering and everything. So I did it at 15%. I could have probably gotten away with 10, but 15% still framed. 15% still framed all the, the areas that I wanted to get well, and I figured that's good enough. And then what you can do is you can turn this mosaic into what's called a plan in the ASIR lingo. And what a plan does is it makes kind of like a placeholder for each of these panels. And you can see them here. And then you can set parameters for each of these panels in terms of how many exposures do you want, how long do you want your exposures to be, and so forth and so on. And then you can kind of work from that. And then you can start taking pictures. So here's the eastern veil, and I was doing 65 exposures. I wanted to get kind of 2 panels a night. So I was, and this was very well placed, almost overhead. So it was going to be visible all night. And I had set up sort of 2 targets for that night. So I had 2 targets, 2 panels selected, and you can selectively enable, disable in the ASIR what is imaging with these with the planning mode. If I were to do it again, I was talking to Bill McGeaney because he actually decided to do a mosaic. Also, I think like the next night I was talking to him, and I told him what I was working on, and he said, "Oh, he's thinking of doing one too." And then at the end of our trip up there, we were there for like five days about. At the end of the trip, I was talking to him a little further, asking him how things were going. And he brought up something that I probably should have done. I think it would have been smarter. So rather than do like 2 panels one night and 2 panels the next night, I think it would have been smarter, which is what he wound up doing, of doing all 4 panels each night, but just doing them for less exposure time. So that if something happens, you get, some equipment failure or you get skunked, the clouds move in or something like that, you at least have something to work with. Because by doing it this way, if I got skunked the rest of the trip, I would have had something, but not really what I was going for. So that's something to keep in mind, that planning this is a lot of data. I wound up recording or imaging almost 16 and a half hours worth of data. So about 4 hours per panel. And it took some juggling later on. I had one equipment problem. And it took some juggling later on to make sure that I had like about 4 hours for each panel. As the trip went on, I was bouncing around a lot in terms of like, I need an hour more on this and I need an extra half hour here. I didn't have to go through that if I had been smart like Bill and planned this a little differently from the beginning. So the other thing that can happen is like in terms of like gotchas, is you could see what this is supposed to look like, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 panels. Well, 2 nights later, when I went back to take more images, this is what it looked like when I opened the plan up. So some bug in the software said, I don't care what you had before, I'm going to make it this now. And you can see, obviously, that if I had gone with this on the subsequent nights, I would have had nothing because it was just kind of random. So I'm not sure what caused this. I haven't seen it happen again when I went back in, but I literally had to go back to these screenshots. Fortunately, I take a lot of screenshots when I'm doing this on my iPad. Because particularly framing, because a lot of times you'll go back to a subject and you want to just get more data on it. And these screenshots are invaluable for not wasting space, to maximize the amount of like viewing or capture area that you're going to. Because if you're misaligned, it's basically wasted space. If you have an hour worth of data like that, you got to crop all that out because it'll mess up your post-processing. If you're trying to do gradient correction and you have weird stuff on the edges from, partial frames and or frame count, stuff like that. So fortunately, I had these screenshots, so I was able to reconstruct this. I did waste some time, obviously, because it took probably 10, 15 minutes to reconstruct it. But I was at least I saw this and I was able to say, oh, geez, and then salvage the session. And I even tried things like, was the camera, did it get confused that the camera rotation angle is wrong? So, I checked the target, I took images, checked the target. All that seemed to be right, even though it says here rotation 150, which seems like it's all those panels kind of twisted. But I couldn't get it to come back to what it was supposed to be. And I just literally deleted them and started over. And that worked fine for the rest of the nights. So my experience with mosaic images, astronomical images, is fairly limited. The Veil complex was my second mosaic of an astronomical image. The first was a mosaic I did a couple months ago up there in July, which was a 2-panel mosaic of the M8, M20, M21 area. But however, I have done a lot of mosaics in my life with still cameras, like doing landscape photography or architectural stuff or things like that. So I had experience with stitching stuff together and how to kind of think about it, but never with an astronomical subject material. This is that first mosaic that I did, and which also, like I said, there's this alternate method that seems like what most people do. That's the most YouTube videos I can find, or this way that I didn't do it. This was done using the way I did the Veil, which seems to be different than how the YouTube channels describe how to do this. I think it came out pretty good, and I'm curious to try the YouTube methods to see if it's better, or if it's easier, or whatever. But this was my first attempt at a mosaic before doing this Veil Nebula one. Excuse me. So from a processing approach, this is how I did it. We'll talk about that first. So I sort of jumped right in to processing the panels instead of researching the topic first. I have a bad habit of overthinking stuff to death, and I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to, I have these 4 images. The data's good. I got 4 hours on each from a really nice site. I'm going to just jump in and process them and then put them together. However, I did understand that conditions from night to night vary, right? There's transparency, seeing the position in the sky, how high it is affects, like gradients, things like that. So I knew there would be variations in each panel. And to me, it made sense that I should process those panels independently as closely as possible, as identically as possible to one another, with adjustments along the way in order to make them match and in order to kind of see what I'm working with. And that just made sense to me, because if I was doing a landscape panoramic, or not a panoramic, but a landscape mosaic or something like that, that's what I would do. I would get them close if there were lighting differences, and then I would stitch them together. So to me, it just made sense to do it this way. And like I said, I also knew that there would be variation, so there might be some tweaking along the way. So doing identical processing to me didn't seem like it would be the right thing to do, but getting it close to identical with some adjustments along the way to make sure the look stayed the same as I was progressing through the panels was what made sense to me. And based on this thinking, and somewhat naive in terms of how other people do this, I did both the linear and the nonlinear processing before combining the panels into a mosaic. That's what came out. So again, I mean, I'm really happy with that. I think that I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but I think it's a cool image. And I was hard pressed, and Lou has tried very adamantly kind of tried to or vehemently try to find the seams. I can't find him. He couldn't find him. I know other people have looked at this. They can't find the seams. So maybe the way I did this was wrong, but there's an old saying like the proof is in the pudding, and it came out pretty good. So again, like I've mentioned before with other topics, there's no really necessarily right or wrong way to do these things, because there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, right, as they say. So this was how I did it. This was the result. But that said, I think it's important to know what other people are doing, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about that, and then I'll have links at the end of the presentation that'll go through that, you know, that you can look at those resources to learn more about doing the processing in the combining before it's stretched. So what most people do, or I shouldn't say most people, what a lot of the YouTube videos prescribe is to do the blending, to actually do the combination before any of the stretching is done. So they recommend doing basically like a gradient correction, maybe a spectrophoto, a sort of a spectrophotometric color calibration, and that's it, and then combine them. And it wasn't that I didn't think of that, it was that it kind of like didn't make sense to me, because if I can't see what this stuff is going to be like, and I know there's going to be variations from night to night, how can I trust that like the background flux is going to match and the all that kind of stuff if I can't even see what's there? So I did it by doing all of the stuff first and then merging them with adjustments along the way, rather than doing it in the nonlinear, in the linear stage before anything was stretched. So what I found after doing this and then looking a little more into it is that a more common approach is for people to combine the panels very early on, like I said, like pretty much after gradient and color correction. And then there are, what they do though to make sure that things match is there are some free processes and scripts that available that are used to kind of adjust the differences in the panels. And I'll talk about them later on, or at least show you the links for them, and because I really haven't done a lot of research on that. At some point, out of my own curiosity, I'll try reprocessing this mosaic using that approach and compare it to what I did. I think that approach, maybe the reason why people use that is because it should take less time, because you're doing minimal processing to the 4 panels, then you're stitching them together, and then you're processing the one big panel. So that should take less time than doing each of the 4 panels, stitching them together, and then doing tweaks on that final thing. And if I do that, I'll report back in the future. So here's a process demonstration. So this is the end result again, more, you know, a little bigger. That's the end result. And then so I'm going to escape out of that. Oh, actually, no, I'm gonna keep going. Sorry, because I added I added the actual workflow diagrams. I made little flow charts because people have asked about that. So this is not just for mosaic processing. This is a workflow that I use pretty often, not all the time, because I don't always separate a starless and stars image. There are still some things that I process as one thing, like the double cluster. It's kind of like, what am I taking out of this if it's all stars anyway, for the most part. So, but a lot of the times now with the quality of the star extraction stuff, it does, I can eke more out of the background if I do starless and then stars images. So from the linear side, I take all of the calibration frames, the darks, bias, and the flats, along with my light frames, and I use the PixInsight weighted batch pre-processing to do the actual combination alignment, things like that. I then do gradient correction. And if it's a simple image like Cherry Springs is really nice because the gradients there are so much less than when I'm shooting at home or shooting somewhere else in a light polluted area, that this gradient correction tool that they've added recently, it's fast and it works really, really well. And I find it works particularly well when you're doing an image that has either a lot of nebulosity or like a lot of stars. There are other tools in PixInsight that I can use if it's like if you're shooting something like the ring or like the helix or something where there's kind of a central object and then a lot of space, not in a super dense star field, that I think work a little better than this. But they're hard to get working if there's a ton of background nebulosity or like a really rich star field, because ideally you're trying to find spots between the stars that you can make a little like preview window and use those in terms of your you know, like what data you're getting for your background. Sometimes they're hard to get when you're in a really dense area. I then do spectrophotometric color calibration on that, and then I run it through Blur Exterminator. I used to use the easy tools, the easy deconvolution, but this is much faster and the results are quite good. So I wound up changing over to Blur Exterminator, I guess about maybe a year ago now. And then I'll either use StarNet or I'll use Star Exterminator. I wound up changing over to Star Exterminator recently just because every time PixInsight did an update, I would have to kind of basically reinstall the StarNet each time, and it got to be kind of a pain. They were doing a lot of updates at one point because they were changing the core software. It's not common that they do that, but there was this one period where, you know, the guy writing it or people writing it were pushing out like core releases it seemed like every month there was a new core release, and I'm reloading StarNet and reload, you know, and relinking the repositories, all that kind of stuff. I got tired of doing that. For $50, I said my time's more valuable than doing that. This just loads up as soon as the new version comes in. And that creates a starless and a star image. And then I usually run the starless image through Noise Exterminator. In the past, I used to do Noise Exterminator before. I would do Blur Exterminator, Noise Exterminator, and then I would do like StarNet too. But what I found was that the Noise Exterminator can sometimes do things to the stars that are not maybe as pleasing as I'd like them to be. It tends to maybe mess up the stars a little bit, and they didn't blend quite as well when I combined them later on, and they didn't look as natural to me as doing it this way. And the stars don't tend to, they're bright, right? And then it's black because the stars only image is just the stars, and then it goes to black because everything that's not a star should be in the starless image. So it made sense to me to switch this. And I've been doing that for the last, I don't know, probably like 4 or 5 months, 6 months, and it's been working out fine. Oh, one other thing too, I'm going to mention real fast is that I generated a PDF of this deck, and I'll post that on in the documents, in the presentation section of the documents, so that people can have a hard copy of this. For nonlinear processing, I take the starless image with the noise exterminator. And then I run it through a histogram transformation. I then run it through a generalized hyperbolic stretch to get more out of kind of the meat of the data. I'll then typically do a black point adjustment, and black point to me is an extremely critical step along the way, and should be done as many times as you need to kind of get your histogram back to where it should be in terms of a working position or kind of a sweet spot. The black point adjustments tended to be very important in terms of doing the panel, keeping the panels looking looking the same, so that when I went to blend them, I would have a good chance of it blending well without seeing the lines. I then do a curves, and curves to me is still like where the magic happens. I know a lot of people, and I've done it. There's these what are they called? They're like multi-point histogram transformations, and these, different things that kind of do what I do with curves by setting a lot of control points and really working the image to try to bring out what I want to in that image. I then did it in SCNR for just a green channel, very, very slight, to get rid of a little bit of green cast that I was picking up. Theoretically, you should never do SCNR on a spectrally calibrated image. Yet, in practice, I find that it gets rid of some of those casts that are in there. You can't be aggressive with it, because then you'll wind up shifting the color of your stars, and you'll wind up causing color shifts in your image. But I find a little bit goes a long way in terms of a lot of this stuff. And then what I do, this is a technique I learned a long time ago, and this is in that thing that I did before, that publication I put out before. I use an LRGB combined, but with just a luminance channel, with a tiny bit of saturation boost. So I'm basically taking the luminance only and combining it into the source image with a tiny bit of saturation boost. And I'll show you this when we actually go through the processing. And I find it winds up giving a really natural looking saturation boost without getting overdone. Doing it with a saturation curve, I think it's easy to get too much, and to me, I don't like the way that looks. So this is how I do it. Again, none of this is right or wrong. It's just kind of like how I do it. With the stars image, I found this script a while ago, 4 or 5 months ago, which is called, it's a free script, and it's a star stretch, it's called. And it works really, really well, because stars are kind of a pain to stretch, because there's like no data when you look at the histogram. There's like nothing there. So you really have to, you would do like a couple histograms stretches first, and then you still have nothing there. You still have like no workable curve to work with. So I would get in there and I would use the scroll wheel on the curves to like go way, way, way down to like black, and then start to put these control points in. And it was always really finicky, kind of a pain in the butt, and it worked fine. You can use GHS, you can use, Sine H kind of stretches. There's a lot of ways to do this, and I've tried a bunch of them, and they work. But this star stretch script is just like wonderful. It kind of knows that you're stretching stars, and it knows the characteristic of what the histogram is going to look like for stars. And you basically apply an overall stretch, similar like what you would do with a Sine H kind of stretch or a GHS. And then you can also do an SCNR at the same time, and you can also even increase the star halos a little bit if you wanted to bring out a little more color in the sky, stars. And I'll show you this when we do the hands-on. Really nice script, and it's free, and it works great. In fact, they just came out with an update. So hopefully when I logged on, when I opened up PixInsight today, it said, oh, there's some updates available. And I said, oh, sure. So, and I do that routinely. And then I realized, oh, it's this script that updated. And I thought, I hope it doesn't like break the image that I had of it, because I keep sort of an instance of things in order to make things repeatable. Again, I'll show this when we go through it. The next thing is to combine them. So I take the processed star image, the processed a starless image and stars image, and then do a blend using in fact, I should have put that on here. I do a blend using a script called blend, and that blend does basically what's called a screen layer of the stars on top of the base image. So if people are familiar with Photoshop, if they're familiar with like the different types of layer properties, there's the default's normal, and then there's difference, there's lighten, there's darken, there's all these different things. Well, one of them is called screen. And screen is a way to kind of take two images and sort of do them kind of like an overlay on top of one another. And I find that gives the most natural looking stars. I used to use pixel math all the time. I would take half of the stars, half of the starless. Sometimes I would even balance a little. If I wanted the stars to be a little dimmer, I might do 60% of the starless, 40% of the stars. And they look good. They look good. There's nothing wrong with that. I think this looks better, and it just looks more natural to me. I don't get, it's much less prone to halos, to getting like halos around the stars or donuts around the stars. It's a free script called blend, and I'll show you that. I'll adjust the black point if I need to. I'll tweak the curves a little and just bring out a little more of what I want to bring out. I'll adjust the black point again. You could even do another curves or something like that. This is the old school. This goes back to my old school learning of doing all this stuff in Photoshop. And in Photoshop, when you stretched an image, you did a histogram transformation, you did curves, you adjusted your black point, you went back and you did a histogram, curves, adjusted your black point, curves, adjusted your black point, curve. So it was just this always kind of like stretching it and then recentering it, or not centering it, but readjusting so that the bulk of that data is still in the left side of the histogram, like the lower, say 25% of the histogram or 40% of the histogram. And then I did all this for the 4 images. And it sounds like a lot, but it actually goes pretty fast because I save instances of all of these things, and then I can just kind of drop them on. Then the last thing you do is you align and combine the processed images. So at this point, since you combined a starless and a star image, you have to plate solve it again, because it doesn't retain the plate solve data. At least PixInsight and that script does not retain the plate solve information. In fact, I don't think Pixel Math does either. When I was doing it in Pixel Math, I would have to replate solve it. It turns out that wound up being tricky, because if you just call up the plate solver, these frames, some of them don't have much in it. It's just like stars with a little bit of like wispy stuff in the corner. Because out of these 4 panels, only 2 of them had like the bulk of the nebulosity. A lot of it was just like stars. And there were a lot of stars because it's 4 hours worth of data and it's Cherry Springs. So there were hundreds, like literally when it would do the plate solve, it would be like, 180,000 stars per panel, like 200,000 stars. I mean, it was, and it would say, I can't figure this out. When it was first doing it, it could figure it out. But after all the processing, it was struggling. So, but what I did was it dawned on me fairly quickly that, oh, wait a minute, the earlier images they were plate solved, and I haven't cropped them, I haven't changed the framing. So let me just grab that data as like a seed in terms of like, where is the center of this frame? And it worked fine then. So if you're doing this and you have a problem with that, keep in mind that your earlier frames will have plate solve data in them. Your earlier images will have plate solve data in there, and you can always kind of grab from that as a seed value for the plate solving script. Once you do that, these images all now have a position in space. And then there's a script in PixInsight called Mosaic by coordinates, which you load the 4 panels in and you say go, and it runs this script and it positions these so that it's like a giant image with just the 1 panel in it floating in black. And it'll do that for each of the 4 images. They get really big. They're like roughly 4 times the size. But they're all aligned at that point because it's using the plate solve data to position these things as accurately as possible. Way more accurately than going into Photoshop and dimming a layer and lining it and twisting it and nudging it. It works, but it's incredibly tedious and sometimes doesn't work. And then after that, there's a script called Gradient Merge Mosaic. And that takes the 4 aligned panels and then merges it into one panel. So after the panels merged, I found that if I rotated it like literally half a degree, I could save more usable space. There was less wasted space when I cropped it. So I rotated it half a degree, I cropped it. I did a little bit of unsharp mask. I typically don't, but on this one I did. I thought I could pull out a little more, and it was a pretty clean image. I had good data from a dark site, so it wasn't very noisy. And I mean, even before the noise exterminator, it was a pretty clean image. I've said this other times, I think with a lot of these processes like unsharp mask, saturation, less is better. Don't overdo it. It'll get ugly fast, and then you basically go back a couple steps. On this particular image, I did do a little bit of unsharp mask to bring out a tiny bit more. I adjusted the black point. I did another curves adjustment. I did a tiny bit of saturation adjustment. And then I actually did one more pass of an SCNR, again, really, really weak, to just, there was a tiny bit of green cast that I had picked up, and I didn't want that on there, so I got rid of it. And that's kind of the processing part. So I'm going to escape out of this. I think that's it. Yeah. Oh, actually, while we're here, then we don't have to come back to it. So then, from additional resources, because I'm gonna post this, or you could do a screen grab if you want. but I will post the PDF. This little it's a real short YouTube video, creating a mosaic image in 3 simple steps. That's actually the only thing I had watched before I did this, because I just wanted to find out, like, what tools do I use in PixInsight to merge a mosaic. I knew there was a mosaic tab in the scripts, but I hadn't used it before. I mean, this is before I did the first one, that M20, M8 one. I watched that video. And then after I did this one, there was another video which I had looked at, which was this one, but I didn't actually even go through all of this. This is the one, that top one's the one that I use. It just tell me how those tools work. I watched it again today to just make sure it was still like a good video, or like one that I would get something out of, and I have the same conclusion. It was very helpful. It's like 10 minutes, and it just tells you how to use those two tools that I talk about here. This mosaic by coordinates and gradient merge mosaic. That's the only thing it's describing. And then after I did this, I started to do a little more digging. And I found this, photometric mosaic issues. And people are talking about the panels not looking the same, and gradients between the panels, and all this stuff. And how do I get rid of this? And how do I do this? And all this stuff. And that led me to these. So I would recommend looking into this. I plan to do it. I plan to do it in more detail and try to reprocess these at some point. But basically, people in the community have developed these are free tools for PixInsight, this normalized scale gradient and photometric mosaic. And these are tools, they're scripts that you can run on your panels while they're in the nonlinear phase. So in other words, they're just kind of gradient correction and color calibrated, but not stretched or not anything else. And it looks at the sort of the background noise. It looks at a whole bunch of stuff and makes adjustment to the panels so that when you do combine them, which would be like the next step after running these, and then stretching them, they are supposed to look even and not all bunched up, or not all blotchy or panelized or whatever you'd call that. There's this particular photometric mosaic issues is a forum thread that's really quite interesting. That's I bumped into that, and that's what got me down the rabbit hole of finding this other approach, because it was a person who had a problem, and he said, like, what do I do about this? And he was really detailed in his description of it, and he had screenshots and images and what he was exactly, and it was really, really well done. And people said and it was the guy actually who wrote these other scripts, who wrote these scripts, answered him. And he said, I developed these tools because I had the same problems, and this is where you can find them. So this is the repository for those tools. And they're all from the same website, as you can see. And this website is the guy who wrote them. So it's fairly useful stuff. So I won't do the thank you slide yet, but we're going to skip out of that. I'll do it in person at the end. How's that? Okay, so PixInsight. So what I do in PixInsight is I have a set of processing tools. I should say process tools, I should say, not processing, process tools that I load up whenever I start PixInsight. So if you right click on the desktop, there's a menu item called process icons, and you can see you can merge, you can save, but we're starting with a clean slate here. So I'm going to load my process icons. And these are my standard processing icons with Star Exterminator, because that's the one that I wound up getting not too long ago when I got tired of reloading StarNet. Even though I still have StarNet in there, and I still use it sometimes, because sometimes it works better for certain things. The one thing that let me just explain one thing with that too. The one thing that Star Exterminator I like is that it's relatively easy to do masks on that if you have an area that's going to confuse it. It's and also batch processing. When I was doing some comet processing before, back in June, I used to use StarNet for that, but you have to do like a thing called a process container and then a bunch of stuff. You have to jump through hoops. Star Exterminator has that built in, so you can batch process like really easily. So that's kind of what pushed me over the edge. It wasn't just that I got tired of reloading StarNet each time they did a kind of a core software upgrade. It was the thing that pushed me over the edge to actually spend the $50 was the fact that it was really easy to do batch processing. So I usually load up these guys, and my workflow is kind of from the top down. And I rarely get below sort of here. Every once in a while, I'll do like SCNR, or I'll rotate it, or I do that. I hardly ever use this HDR multiscale transform. I played with it a lot, and I have a much harder time getting good results from it than just working in curves. And maybe it's just because that's how I learned originally, but I find I have so much more control when I'm processing in curves. So what I'm going to do is that's sort of my template. I'm going to load a project file. And this project file is the first one. This is the first panel that I processed because I wanted to have something that had nebulosity in it. And these are the process icons that I wound up using for that. So I'm going to load that. You can see it overwrote most of that. And then it put this stuff here. So the way I work is I'll open up like screen transform, and I'll do the transform, and then I'll basically collapse it and bring it down here. So every time I do something, I'll save an instance of that so I could reuse it later on. And this was particularly important because I had 4 panels to process, and I wanted to process them all the same way. So like, for instance, if I open up this, these are the settings that I used when I did my first 2 histogram transfers. So this is the starless image, histogram transform 1 and 2. This is the settings, and it's kind of meaningless now because there's no data here, and we'll show it in the future, in a minute, are the settings. And it's really convenient for reprocessing something later on. Like, let's say you do something and you're at this step and you don't like it anymore. It's getting too over baked or overcooked or whatever, and you want to go back to an earlier step. Well, you still have these steps that you can now tweak or just use directly. And the way you do that in PixInsight is you grab this little triangle here and you just drag it to the desktop. So that created an instance of that histogram transform with those same parameters. These are the parameters of it. And you can do that with almost anything that's a process. Well, you can do it with anything that's a process. You can even do it with some scripts, but not all scripts. Some will just kind of save a snapshot of the source code parameters. So let's go to this image. This is the first panel that I opened up. And now at this point, that panel was run through the weighted batch preprocessing. So this is really the output of the weighted batch preprocessing. In fact, let me go back one step. Hold on one second. I have to get the Zoom thing out of the way. It's in the way of my folder. So if I go to this image, this is right out of weighted batch preprocessing. So I'm going to go this screen transfer. I'm going to unlink it because this is going to have a ton of green in it. This is totally uncorrected right now, other than flats and bias and darks. And I'm going to stretch that. This is showing my high rejection. So these are some satellite trails and stuff like that were in there. Probably some like sometimes the seeing will cause a bright object to kind of bloom a little bit, but that's not in every frame. So the software knows enough that, you know, those are outlier pixels. So these are the satellite trails. So it got rid of those. These are this is the dark rejection. And you can see there's some alignment between the multiple nights, because when I went back and had to recreate this, I had moved to a new location. I moved up the road to the Big Dipper Lodge from the observing field. Things weren't exactly the same, but fortunately that overlap was enough that it didn't matter. And then this is the image, but this still has that weird stuff in it, right? Like there's going to be some frames that were cut off there. So I don't tend to use that. What I do is I use a frame. PixInsight has an option for auto cropping when you're doing weighted batch preprocessing, which works incredibly well. So it took all that data and looked where the superset was and then cropped it. And that's this image. I then go in and I save this. This is in my sort of what's in PixInsight, it's called the master folder, because this is the master image it created. And then I just rename that. I basically change the identifier and I just save it as in my folder called processing. And that's this image. It's the same identical image with a shorter name, more meaningful to me. It's the object, the panel, the location, 83 3-minute subs, 4 hours and 9 minutes, the telescope I used, the focal reducer, the filter, auto crop, and then this is the gradient corrected version of that. So all I did was take that other image. In fact, I'll open that. This is it right here. And we'll do the gradient correction to it. So this is that image here. Screen stretched and then screen stretched. And again, I chose this as my first one because it's got a nice bright object in it and a boatload of stars. This is what I was saying. Picture if there were there was nothing in there, and it's, you know, the plate solver is just trying to look for stars, right? It got to this and when it was all stretched and everything, and it was sort of like, I'm not sure exactly what to do with that. I need a better starting point. So the next step in this is gradient correction. Again, it's right up here, but I saved an instance of it down there. So these are the default settings. So if I drop that on there, this will give you an idea of how little change there is. That's with the gradient correction off, that's with it on. You can see a little, you might not be able to see it. I can see it here. A little bit of shift if you look in this lower right corner.
Yeah.
You'll see a little bit of shift there. This is again the benefit. This is a dark sky site, almost overhead.
Yeah.
So very little gradient. And then I usually save that. I usually save that image. The next step is to do the photometric color calibration. And that you drop in. It'll take a minute to process. We could do like a cooking channel because I have all these images saved. I could just like pull it out of the oven when it's done, but I think it's important to see some of this actually in action. Right now it's going through, it's finding what it is. It's saying, okay, this is what I came up with. These are all the star mappings. You can see it's fairly tight. It's following a nice linear path in terms of the mapping. A lot of times I'll save this. You can save that as a PDF. I've never actually wound up using them afterwards, but I throw it in my log folder. It's probably just because being an engineer, you kind of save stuff like that. And now it looks terrible because it's been color corrected. So now you go back to the screen transfer function. You reset those parameters by hitting this little icon on the lower right. I'm going to link them. I'm going to link the R, G, and B channels. And now I'm going to execute a screen transfer. And that's the color calibrated version of that image. The next thing I did with this is I ran Blur Exterminator. And I just used the defaults on this particular image. There were so many stars that I decided not to adjust the star halos. There's a lot of times when I'm working with an image that you can see here, I have a Blur Exterminator extra halo. I'll bump that up like to like 0.12 over the 0 point to just increase the halos a tiny bit more. It won't shrink the stars as much, and you can bring out a little more color in the stars. If it's an object, a subject that doesn't have like a boatload of stars like this, I mean, this is in the heart of the Milky, not the heart, but I mean the arms of the Milky Way. I thought it might get a little bit busy, so I just went with the defaults for Blur Exterminator. And when you drop that on, again, this is going to take a few minutes to run. But when you drop that on, you get the most improvement. I think it does an amazing job bringing the stars down, reducing the star size and kind of controlling the stars. Actually, I'll let it run. It's probably faster to just pull some images up, because some of these can take a little while, especially with this camera. It's funny when I shoot with the 533, that little 1-inch square. I love processing those because everything like is just seconds. There's not a lot of data. This is like, probably 3 times the data that's on that other sensor. So it just takes a while.
After you combine the 4, it's huge. It's ridiculous.
Huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. Yeah, each of those files are 2 gig. So every file is 2 gig when I'm processing that combined one. And that's not using that's not drizzle. I didn't drizzle any of these because it would be insane. It'd be 4 times that. It'd be like 8 gig per file.
God.
So this is undrizzled. On the subsequent ones, the ones that are gonna take a little while, I'll just pull up the image. So I think the meat of it is really when you get into the tweaking. This is just like getting the stuff ready to work on, is the way I look at it. When I look at the linear processing that we're doing now, it's really just getting you something that you can start to play with further. It's very important, but it's more like turning a crank. It doesn't have the finesse to it that the other steps require. It's getting there, 87, 88, 89. I always like the progress meters that like, it'll do like 1, 2, and then a minute later, 3, 4, and it gets to 40 and then it goes to 100. I always like those kind of progress meters.
Yeah.
They make you suffer in the beginning and then they just get it over with. So, I can just collapse that back there, or if I really want it to be more permanent of exactly what I had, I can create an instance of it. And that instance, you can rename to Blur Exterminator. And then if I open that up, if I double click that, it's the same thing. That's typically what I do. Then if I close it, it stays there. But you can see here, if I go back to this, I'm going to go back, I'm going to undo Blur Exterminator, redo it. You can see that one of the biggest effects is in that reduction of the stars by getting rid of a lot of that blooming and stuff like that, because the stars are bright and they're going to do that. They're going to really be affected by the atmosphere as point sources, and some type of deconvolution. What Blur Exterminator is doing is really a deconvolution. So it's going to sharpen some of this detail. So if you ignore the stars, look at the nebulosity, you can see that detail come out without really doing much to the noise. And that's the beauty of deconvolution. It'll affect the noise a little bit, but not as much as like an unsharp mask. Unsharp mask can wreak havoc with noise. And that's before, that's after.
That's a great comparison.
Yeah, you can really see it, and you can even go further. And on some images I've done that. So you can even this parameter here, this sharpen non-stellar. Sometimes I've gone up to like 0.6, and you can pull out a little more detail. I probably could have done it on this because it's fairly clean data. If you look at that background, yeah. This is with no noise reduction. It's really not bad at all. Again, benefit of a lot of data, 4 hours of data, and dark skies. The next thing I did was Star Exterminator. And that actually runs pretty fast. So this is the defaults. I have never had an instance or a need to run this large overlap. But if you have sort of a problem image, you can run that large overlap. And that'll increase the size of the little box, like that little box that is moving around to pull those stars out. That'll increase the size of that. I think it's like 40% or something. And it makes it take like 4 or 5 times longer. It can make it really take a long time. When you mouse over that, it kind of warns you that, are you sure you want to do this? Like, do you really think you need to do this? Because it's going to take a while.
Do you have any idea if it's hitting your GPU for speeding that up, or is it all processor CPU? Do you know?
It is. I've optimized it pretty much using the optimization routines in PixInsight. One thing that I didn't realize, it's kind of interesting. I'm not sure if it's just because of the way the cores are set up, but if you put like temporary directories for processing, you actually get more improvement by just putting the same temp directory in multiple times than you do putting different external drives and stuff like that. That can actually start to slow it down. So I have, if you look at my optimization stuff, I have like, 8 instances of like this one hard drive and like 4 of another and stuff like that.
Yeah. And
it actually, when I ran the benchmarks each time, it was getting faster. Then I started to put other drives in, thinking it would help more, and it didn't. It actually started to go the other direction. So by adding more instances, it actually made it better. So here's all the stars. And here's the starless. And this is, again, this is before noise reduction. And then I take the starless image and I run the noise exterminator on that. This one will go fast because it's not much to think about. I think the problem with those Milky Way objects is that there are so many stars that it's sitting there cranking like crazy, right? When it pulls them out of those panels. So this is the after image there.
Ooh, that's smooth.
It's beautiful.
It still preserved a lot of the structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't tried yours, John, the Uber Smooth, to see how it compares.
No, RC Astro's better, but
But it's impressive. So that's before and then after. You hardly notice any degradation in structure.
yeah.
If you need more training data, John, for your
I might
algorithm,
have to hit you up. Yeah.
you can hit me up. I always like the bat in there. That bat, it's upside down
Oh
though.
yeah.
The little bat in there.
Mm.
So anyway, so now you get into the kind of the meat of things. So I'm going to unstretch that. And let's just get this out of the way. I'm going to unstretch that. And then I'm going to pull up the histogram transfer. And if I click this little checkbox, it'll bring the actual data in. And if I click that, it'll bring a preview window up. So the first stretch, I literally just pull the slider there because I just need to get this off the left edge. So I'm going to execute that. And then a lot of times I just execute it again. So very, very often I'll just do the first stretch just twice, bang, bang. And then I close that. And then I'll bring up the histogram transform.
Gary, do you leave it at 8 bits or do you change that?
I haven't changed it. I guess I should. I always just leave it at that default.
Yeah, what's the camera? 10?
Camera's 16 actually, but usable is probably, I would say 14 or something.
I wonder how much that would make a difference.
I don't know. You can try it. So anyway, these are the settings I used before, except for that. So I'm going to execute that. And let's see what it looks like.
You have to go backwards to the beginning.
Well, I can just go back this step and then change it.
I think that bit is only affecting the number of points in your curve. It's
I
not
think so too. I think it's
not
just affecting this. I don't think
Yeah.
it's affecting the data.
Yeah. It's
Right.
not the bit depth of the actual image.
I think it's just the representation that you're seeing here. So if I go to 8-bit, let me look at the preview. Yeah, you can see the curves shift ever so slightly. Let's go to 6-bit. Yeah, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's just affecting this representation. I don't believe it's affecting the processing.
Yeah.
So they were my 3 stretches. And then I save between every step. Like I don't save between like histogram 1 and 2 and histogram 3, but I would now save this. If I were doing this like without an audience, I would change this and I would put everything that I did. I just do one at a time. So this one would become, I'll just grab it from here. This one would become this. So it's got the same prefix, right? The auto crop, gradient correction, spectral calibration, blur exterminator, starless image, noise exterminator, histogram transform. And then I would save as, and I would paste that into there. I'm not going to overwrite that because it's sitting right there. The next step, I very often, like probably nowadays, like 90% of the time, go to generalized hyperbolic stretch. And typically what I do with this is I have my my image here, and I'll reset it just to show you. This is how it would come up. I have an instance saved of that, so I can go back to that. So I'll bring up the preview window, and I'll click somewhere in a fairly dark region, and it puts a line here, which is the symmetry point. So that's kind of the place where I want to start sort of stretch around or stretch about. And then you can say, once you set that, once you click to a place where you want that to be, and I kind of get it like where it's sort of in the middle of that curve, a little bit maybe on the darker side, so it'll push the brighter stuff a little bit further. Then you can come in here and you can just sort of do a stretch on that. That was me not letting go of the mouse fast enough. I typically protect highlights, because right here, you can get into trouble. You can start to blow out. You can start to blow out the brighter stuff here. Now I still have a ways to go. That's only 70%. The bright stuff's only 70%, 75%, 80, 81% of max. So there's still some margin, even without protecting the highlights, but that margin's good. I like having that margin up there, and I like having a little more of it. So a lot of times I'll pull this down. You can see that the brightness coming down a little bit to just more like asymptotically approach the diagonal line rather than come in horizontally. And then sometimes I'll protect the shadows. Now, right now I have a lot of room in the shadows because I haven't adjusted the black point. So you don't really need to do that on this. And then the other thing you can do is bring up the local intensity. So the local intensity will kind of take that lower portion of the curve and then pull it up a little bit. And if I go back to the full screen, this is bright, but we're going to black point adjust this because our black point's now going to be sitting up here somewhere. And if I go, let's see where we are with that, 1.16 and 7.3. So let's go to what I actually did on this image. So a little less than that. So I was a little more aggressive on the stretch, a little less aggressive on the local intensity, and not very aggressive on the protection, and a tiny bit on the shadows. That's what I wound up doing. So I'm going to do that because that's what I did before. So all of this is kind of a, it's a little bit of a touchy-feely kind of thing. So if I look at this is getting pretty bright, and I probably would have gone a little more light protection, but we're still at around 92, 93% in our brightest regions. But what that tells me is I'm going to need to be more careful later on with that upper end so that I don't start to clip the nebulosity. You can always sort of push it a little more later on. It's really hard to get it back. If you clip, you can't get it back. So then the next thing I did was I adjusted the black point. Now you can see here the black point. If I reset that, the black point's all the way, like, it's at black, it's at 0. There's a lot of room there. So if I go back to what I did before, I didn't bring it all the way down because I want to leave room later on. I don't want to get the black too black, because you can clip the blacks and then all of a sudden you get these blotchy things in the background which are really hard to deal with. So I leave some room. So if I put the preview on and off, I'm going to go with a moderate black point adjustment now. I can see the background nebulosity. If I zoom in, if I really zoom in, it's still smooth. I don't have anything clipped. You're not seeing anything go to true black. Let's go up here to a little darker region. Still looks good to me. So that's what I wound up doing. I did that black point adjustment. And then I did curves. And curves to me is really where the finesse comes in. So the way I do what I do with curves, I'm going to bring up the histogram. So that's the histogram. And if I were to reset that, it would be our previous image. So what I do is this. I walk around the image. I go to a nice dark area. There's some darkness there. And I say, okay, if you click on it, it shows you where the RGB channels are. They're spread apart there, right? So the red line is the level of the red channel. The blue line's the level of the blue, and the green. So that's where those data values are falling. So I go to a dark area because I want to protect the darks. And I'll put 2 control points here. And you might ask, why 2? The reason for 2 is that if I grab up here and I pull that, if I have 2, nothing happens to below the second one, because this second point acts as a block, right? You can see what's going on there. You don't see anything changing here. If I lose that point, look what happens. Oops, I'm sorry. I put one. I actually grabbed another point instead of that. See the bottom of the tail swinging with it? Can you see that over here?
Oh yeah.
So if I do the same thing here, I'll put a second point there. I'll put a point here. I can go all over the place with that, and nothing's happening here. So let me reset that. And I'm going to I didn't need to reset, I'll just call this up. So this is what I had. This is what I did to that image. So you can see here, and sometimes when it's all said and done, I'll actually get rid of the second point, because sometimes I want to have a little bit of deflection in that curve. But I'll put I always start with 2 points at the top and bottom, sometimes even in between. And then I'll work the image. I'll walk here with my mouse and I'll say, okay, let's say I want to bring that up. I want to bring that region up a little bit more. So I'm going to see where that is, and that's in here. And I'm going to pull that up, and you can see, let me zoom in on that so you can see it better. You can see the subtle difference in that. See right in here, that bright stuff right in here is what's affected by that control point. If I go to this control point, you can see the detail in this part of the nebulosity is what's affected. This is what happens if you go too far. You start to get kind of a posterization look, right? And that's a good way to see what something's doing. Go like really far. And you can see, well, that's really posterized, but that's what's being affected by that control point. And now bring it up a little bit, but avoid that where you're getting a lot of posterization. The posterization is happening because what it's doing to that histogram, if you looked at this histogram as individual lines, it's putting too much space in between those individual lines by stretching them out too far. And that'll give you kind of like missing values. And you wind up with this posterization kind of effect. It's very similar, Brett, to what had happened with that image when we were going through it, when we did that kind of group brainstorming. And Joe Lamb said, oh, maybe it's being posterized because of the bit depth. And that's exactly what was happening. So I'll sit with the image and I'll go to an area. Oops, sorry. I had a thing active. Like here. Like let's go into this area. You can see I put a control point in there. That's bringing up that background. It's hardly having any effect anywhere else. If I pull that all the way down, that's severely posterized. You wouldn't do that. But you can really see what it's affecting. And that nebulosity above this control point isn't doing much. If I put a second point there, it's really hard to drop them and not move it. If I put a second point there, it won't do anything to that. That whole top of that curve is totally isolated. And this is a trick that I learned, I don't know, I don't even know how many years ago, using Photoshop when you only had 5 images you were stacking or 8 images that you were stacking because you were using a DSLR and you were doing 10-minute exposures or something like that because they weren't that sensitive. Now with all the shorter exposures because the cameras are so sensitive and the stacking a lot of images for all the benefits that gives you, the techniques don't really have to be any different. And I find this to work really well. I'm not saying this is the right way to do it. This is how I do it. And I'll sit there and I'll kind of play with that and really try to bring that out. So if I'm going to do this image, I'll bring up what I had, bring up the histogram, and then I'll execute it. And that's where I am now. I was starting to pick up the screencast. There's a script that I found, and I don't often use this, but there's this guy, Bill, forget his last name. He's the one who wrote a lot of these other scripts. And he did a modified version of SCNR that better accommodates normalization of the channels, the fact that you are going to have some uneven sensitivities of the RGB channels. I happen to use that on this. On a later image I did recently, I didn't use this. I just used the standard SCNR. And I'll usually do this like 80% or so, something like that. And I don't usually go to the extremes. But SCNR is going to just pull a little bit of that green tint out. So if I look at this image, if I go back, you can see that.
Yeah, it comes through.
Now, like I said before, theoretically, if this is color calibrated, you wouldn't do an SCNR. So part of this is just this to me looks more appealing than that with the green cast to it. And if you look at what's happening to the histogram, if you call up the histogram and look at the difference with what's going on here, you can see It's a fairly subtle thing. It's actually pulling the top of this curve here, the green, and aligning it better with those so that you don't have this showing. Another way to do it is you can come in here and you can grab the green channel and you can move it around a little bit. But I find this is a little more like you can get in trouble because you could, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have the preview on, sorry. So I could pull that green channel a tiny bit back and get rid of some of that cast. So even though it's calibrated, the spectrophotometric calibration is really based on the stars. And the theory is that if the stars are correct, then everything else will be spectrally balanced. How true that is, I mean, it makes sense, but I still wind up finding some color cast sometimes in it. And that's where the SCNR, if I go back to that, we can get rid of the preview. If I go back to that, from there to there, you can see it's a very subtle difference in that histogram. And to me, that looks more pleasing than that. And part of this is eye candy, right? None of this stuff, we don't know what any of this stuff looks like. And nobody sees it like this. So, and then the next thing I do is this LRGB combination to bring up the saturation. I put the saturation value at about 0.4. The default is 0.5, I think. Yeah, the default's 0.5. I'm going to extract the luminance channel. And then I'm going to apply that luminance channel to the image with a tiny bit of saturation boost. I probably should have turned off this chromiance noise reduction because it winds up taking a while. It gets to 96% and sits there for like a minute. Here, 94%. Let's see how long it sits there. I hope it makes a liar out of me and it goes fast.
It's the opposite of what you want.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to stay at 4% and then be done. And
Right.
pick.
Yeah.
This teased me into thinking it was going to be done soon.
Gary, you lost me there, Gary. What did you just do?
So what I'm doing, Brett, is I'm taking the luminance channel
Yep.
only and reapplying it back. So I'm taking the brightness of the object and I'm reapplying it back to the RGB data with a tiny bit of saturation boost.
Oh, you're taking the luminance channel out, making the saturation change to it, and then putting the luminance channel back in.
It's sort of combining it it's applying that luminance to a slight increase in saturation.
Okay.
Is I believe what it's doing. Somebody might know better exactly what it's doing. See, John, it's still at 94.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. So this is what it did. So if I go back and I go back to that I'll zoom in here.
It's definitely visible. Add some color.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not in preview. So it adds some color to all the it adds like to the brighter regions because that's where the luminance state is, right? If I look at the luminance, that's the luminance data.
I see. So it's doing adding saturation, but it's scaled by the luminance.
By the luminance.
So the dark areas, you're not adding color to the dark areas. Only the bright.
Correct. You're adding, to whatever proportion there's luminance, right?
Right.
Right. You're adding more color to the brighter things and very little color to the darker things.
That's cool. I've definitely done generic saturation stretch, and then I start seeing the greens in the background, stuff like that.
Right, right.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
smart.
this to me, it's a technique. I think it's in that paper, Bill, Brett, that you have. It's in there, I believe. It's a thing that I learned from a YouTube video when I was first learning PixInsight that was done by High Point Scientific. And it just seemed like a really, really pleasant way to do it rather than over saturating, basically. And you can see it has a really nice effect. It just pulls it up a tiny bit, but in a very smooth way. You can see the data is still really, really smooth. And then from a starless standpoint, I still want to adjust the black point. So if I go here and I look at that background still bright, I still have plenty of margin. I still have plenty of margin in that. So if I look at dark areas, it's still nothing's clipped, a little noisy, but you know, obviously there's going to be some because there is some data down there. But in the zoomed out view, and even relatively zoomed in, even if I look at a darker area, it's still relatively smooth image. So I'll adjust the black point of that. And you can even go further. Like this is what you want to avoid. You want to avoid this. It looks more contrasty. I mean, look at all the pop of that, right? But then when you really get into it, you can see here how you're just losing a bunch of information. Stop it, Gary. Click it and then drag it. You can see how blotchy it's getting, how much data you're losing. You still have all the bright stuff. I mean, you could lose most of that curve just to give you an idea where the real meat of this is. I'm going to lose all that, right? Look what's still left.
It's a long tail.
Right? So these tools like histogram and curves, to me, are like still the most useful tools because it really lets you see what you're working with.
Can you put it in log view for your logarithmic view on that histogram? Is there a button for that?
There probably is. Yeah, let me see what.
Right, one of those things.
That's grid. Yeah, this is yeah, I'm not sure.
Maybe not.
Yeah, you probably could. I'm
That's
not
interesting. I'm
that
often in log view when I'm doing it, so it's cool to see this.
Yeah, I've always used it in this view. This is a linear view. I'm not sure. You probably can.
Yeah, that's cool.
I don't know how to.
No pressure.
I feel a lot of pressure.
You're doing great. Oh my God.
No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so that's kind of that image, except for combining them. So then I usually bring that down. That would be saved. And then this script is a free script by this SETI Astro. It's called Star Stretch. And it's really just nice and simple. So you got to be careful with this. You don't want, so the preview is not that great. It shows a preview here. That's a preview of what it'll look like. I kind of like it when it's the other window. you can zoom in kind of like this. You can fit that, and then you have to refresh it. So it's a little bit lame from that perspective in terms of having a dynamic preview, but it works fairly well even with that. So this parameter addresses how much stretch there is, and they caution you going above 5, adjust above 5 with caution. And every time you move it, you have to refresh it. It's not dynamic. On this particular image, I went with 5.2. I went a tiny bit above 5 because I want to retain a lot of these stars. You know, there's a technique that people use. They'll have an image that's in the Milky Way or something, and they'll pull out almost all of the stars because they want to show the nebulosity, and they'll have a hint of the stars. I think that's fine. I like those images, but I prefer to retain more of those stars, especially since this is the Milky Way and there's a boatload of stars. I just don't want them to become like so obtrusive that you can't really appreciate the image as well because the stars are too in your face. So I'll give it some boost, but I won't go overboard with it. And then on this, the color boost amount, since I didn't do an extended halo on that previous process when I did the blur exterminator, I'm going to give it a tiny bit of color boost here, and I did 1.2 on that. And I did not remove the green. You can also remove green SCNR at the same time, and then you execute that, and it's done in one fell swoop. So it's a really nice script, and it beats a lot of that using a microscope to to go in and stretch that. If we were to do it the other way, like if I pull up that stars image, if I pull up that stars image and I unstretch that, the screen stretch, and I pull up a histogram, let's reset that. Let's refresh it. So you can see there's really nothing there. So if I stretch that all the way down, stretch it again, there's still a lot there. So you can do that again. And right now that's preview. And I mean that works. And you can go into curves, or you could go into like the arc sine H or something like that, or the hyperbolic stretch. Even if you did curves, you can see that. Now here I can, if I scroll my wheel here, I can get more resolution in that. I can basically magnify that. You can see I can play with it here, and that's how I always used to do it, and it works fine. But that other and I don't want to save that. No, I don't want to save that. Oh, I'm sorry. I do want to close it. I just don't want to save it. We can get rid of that. So now we have the stars image, and I would save this. This is a new file. And we have the starless image. So then I go to script, and under utilities, this is another free one. There's this image blend script that this was developed by this guy Mike Cranfield in conjunction with Adam Block. It works really, really well. It's a free tool. So I picked the starless image. I picked the star image. I have my default set so that it's screen. It's doing screen blending. I'm going to create a new image, and I'm not going to do that here because it'll try to overwrite something somewhere. Yeah, that's Perseus A. I was working on that. So I'll type in the name, and typically what I do is I'll just grab that prefix that we started with. Like the object, the panel, the cherry springs, the how many subs, how many, and I wind up hitting the check mark to execute it, and it'll create a new image that looks like that. So if I get rid of those, that's the equivalent image. So that was my first one. It goes faster, obviously, when you're not talking about it, because I have the tools and I just kind of can do it pretty quickly. Why is that not going away? Oh, there we go. Then what I did with this is, you can see here combined, is on this particular image, I did a curves adjustment. It probably was really subtle. Oh, it's still magnifying. Hold on. Yeah, there we go. So that's what I did as far as curves go on that. I did a final tweak on that. You can see here, I have a lot of control points. And each one of those is doing a little bit different thing. Nothing drastic, but just it gives me a little more punch, brings up a little more detail in this region without saturating. So if I really go in tight and I put the cursor there, I'm still like 83, 80, 85%. Now stars will be saturated in the centers. That's 99%. So that's still not totally saturated. This one probably is. 99.7. So they're way up there, but they're stars. They're bright, relatively bright stars for an object that you're taking hours worth of data. And when you look at them like this, they look fairly, at least to my eye, they look fairly natural. If I go to this one, this is saturated. That guy's 100%. In the core, if I go to the edge, just slightly off, you can see now I'm down to 90, 80, 87, 93. So it's just the very, very core is 100, like 111. And now I'm just a tiny bit off the core, and now I'm 99%, 99.4. So I kind of keep an eye on that just to make sure that I'm not like that star is not saturated at all. It's way up there, but it's not saturated. And to me, bright stars should be saturated. I'm okay with that, because I want to, the meat of this is in this area here. So that is what was applied to that. And I called that done at this point. I said, okay, on to the next image. And I literally did the same thing with the next 3 images. And I saved the icon. So if I look at like another image, let's look at another panel. I'm going to load the project. So that was 1-2. So let's go to like 2-2. I don't know why this dialog takes so long to look into that directory for a project file. So I double clicked that folder because the project file's in that folder, and that's how long it took to open the folder. And it's consistent. So I'm not sure what it's looking for. So you can see here that this should auto close. There we go. So you can see this is almost the identical set of icons on that. If I go to another image, and if I bring up that image, that's 2-2. So here's the combined version of that. This one I did a black point adjustment. I did a black point adjustment and I did a curves on this one. So it started out like this when I combined it. It started out like that, and then I did a subtle black point adjustment and a subtle curves. You can see it's really not a lot of difference. The whites are it's a little brighter, the nebulosity is a little brighter, and the background's a little darker. That's that image. If I go to 1-2 we did. So if I go to 2-1 or 2_1, I should say, and we'll wait for it to do its thing. Oh, I'm sorry. This one I do not have a project file on this because I used the exact same one as the previous one. So there isn't one there. And let's look at the last one. Let's see what, yeah, so here I have one. And it looks about the same. There's going to be subtle differences in some of these. That one's going to be the same. But the curves will be slightly different. Some of those shapes will be slightly different, but they're going to be very, very similar. Fairly gentle. You don't want to do anything drastic because it'll give you posterization. This is this image. That's the one we saw before. Let's pull up this one. I'm going to pull up all four. There we go. So that's what I wound up with. And they were pretty even looking to me. I actually saved them out as PNGs, and then I actually pulled them into Photoshop to just do kind of like a quick, like, what does it look like next to one another? How even are they? Stuff like that. And they look pretty good. I've made a minor black point adjustment. That's why some of these black point adjustments are in here on the combined image to get them to be more, similar to one another in terms of the overall look. But when you at this point, I have to replate solve these, and you can see why it kind of causes a little bit of a problem. Just because it's even like if I put in like NGC 6960 for like the Veil Nebula, whoa, what part of it is that? Right? That's really like the part that's up here. That particular NGC. Like if I look at the annotated images, this is 6992, the Eastern Veil. This is 6995. So when you do the plate solving, you have to kind of start somewhere and you say it's NGC something or it's M13 or something, right? And then it kind of figures out the center of the frame. Well, I was having a hard time doing that because the designations for these are a little obtuse because it's like a big area. So what I wound up doing was going back. You notice like when I open an image, it shows this data here. That's the plate solve data. That's the astrometric data. So what I did here was I selected that. I saved it as a text file. And I said, okay, I'm going too far, sorry. I said, where's the center of that object? Because it tells you the center, it tells you what the bounds are of that object. And I just put that in. I just keyed in the RA in the deck as the seed value, rather than saying it's NGC 6995, because that was confusing it. And then it solved it right away. Very, very quick solution. So that's a little trick if you have problems with these kind of oddball frames. Like you look at that, what object is that? It's not some NGC thing. It's a remnant of something that's an NGC something. So that's what I wound up doing. So I had these 4 images. And then you take that, and there's a script under Mosaic in PixInsight. It's called Mosaic by Coordinates. And you basically take those images, the 4 images you have, you load them into you load them in here. You say add files, and you go to let's go to that. So that was Cherry Springs, Vale Complex. So I would go to, actually what I did was I copied into this Mosaic processing folder, so I didn't have to go to 4 folders. And it's that file, it's that file, it's that file, and it's that file. Those are the 4 files that we have open now. And what it does is it knows where they are, and it puts them in the correct perspective relative to like how big the total picture would be. And it puts a little suffix on it, underscore RA. You could put whatever you want. It just basically, it means that it's kind of registered as part of that. So you open that, and I should have probably cleared it first. Let's just do that. So that, and that. I open that, and then I tell it what file name I want, and I did an output suffix of RA, which is a default. But you could put down, registered. You can do whatever you want. And then you say, okay. And that should write those in that folder with a different name. So it shouldn't overwrite anything. So it sits there and it cranks for a little bit. This doesn't take too long. So it's loading the astrometric data. You can see it here. The plate solid data. And it knows the extent of the file. And it says, this is where it belongs in the mix. Did I change? Oh, I might have changed the name. I'm sorry. I think I changed the name because when I'm done processing something, I put a little parentheses P, but I didn't navigate to that folder. So it still had without the parentheses P. So it got to the end, it tried to write the files and it says, I can't find the output folder. So we're going to say, fine, we don't need to do that again. You understand the point.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure where it's putting it. It's saving something right now. I'll find some folder, some files
A giant file in it.
Yeah, somewhere. Oh, I'm sorry. It's just doing them one at a time. It's saving them one at a time. So it's going to give that error 4 times because it can't find the output directory. Sorry about that. Okay, should be done now. So what that did, let's close those down. What that did is it made these files. Now these are big. These are 1 gig each. It made it look like that. It took that panel and it stuck it into position relative to where it should be with the other panels. It rotated it if it needed to, because it knows what the plate solve data is. It's a clever little script. So if I superimpose those, you can see how that's how they would, position relative to one another. If I put the next one in, that's where that one wound up landing. You can see the fact that I changed locations. I barely had enough overlap there, right? You can see where those panels overlap. There's a tiny little corner overlapping. If I look at that one, there's significantly more overlap, but it still worked. There was enough overlap. I think if I didn't have that bug or hit whatever happened with the rotation or whatever that weirdness with ASI air, it would have been better. And also I changed locations and stuff like that. So I took stuff apart. I didn't take the camera off, but things were a little bit skewed the next night. You can see there's a decent overlap. So it takes you take those 4 images now, and there's another script. Oh, I'm sorry. It's called Gradient Merge Mosaic. This is in that presentation. And this you add files. So if I go to that mosaic processing, I want to add that, and that. You add those 4 files. They're the ones that are open here. And then you have some things to play with. The default in terms of how it combines them is average. I have not found that to work well. I find that a better approach is to use overlay for that. Average tries to take the average of the overlapped regions, and it winds up making it. You can see where it merged it, and you can see kind of some discontinuities and stuff. Sometimes you'll get the stars will look double or something like that. The overlay works better because it basically takes one image and it puts it on top of the other one in a smart way, in a feathered way. And these are the parameters you can use to feather it. There's a feather radius and there's a shrink radius. I wound up doing this on the defaults because I had them so well matched, the images so well matched, I think, from the processing that worked well. But I've seen like that one video I said to watch, the short one. He said that what he winds up doing is like sometimes 6 on this parameter, the shrink radius, and then the feather radius. He said sometimes he'll go real high. He'll start at like 100 and then back it down until it looks good. I left it at 10 and it worked fine. He did a shrink radius of 8 and a feather radius of 85. And he said it looked really good. You could not see the seams. So this is what you would play with. You'd play with this feather radius and you'd play with this shrink radius. And you basically, we could try it. We could just try 6 and 20 just to see what it does. And then we'll execute that. like dead air time here. I don't think this takes long, but I'm not sure. I forget.
Hmm.
This is like the other thing, John. It gets to a point and then it's like says, I'm at 96% because it did a
Yeah,
lot of stuff
it
fast.
was scrolling fast. Stop. It's still going though. I saw it go. Maybe it takes
Yeah,
30 seconds per here.
yeah. We're still spinning.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a lot of data.
I really like seeing it uncropped and how they're each just a little rotated. Which were the ones you shot first? Is it like that top left panel there?
Um,
Because that first night they were aligned. Because those two were real aligned.
yeah, the first, I think it was with the Eastern Veil was the first one I shot because I wanted to have something visible. Like if it didn't work, I'd still
Yeah.
have an object.
Right.
Um, it's still spinning, so we'll let it go a little longer.
Mhm.
Yeah, again, I have all these saved, so there we go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Look at that. It's a big image.
So that's what came out of that. And it's funny, if you look, where I looked was like right there. So if I move that to the edge, you can see a little artifact here,
Yeah.
right? And then good luck where that
Yeah, you can't see it at all inside the
good luck
image.
where that blend line is. I mean, that's impressive to me that it can take that. You look at this, tiny bit of artifact right there, and then nothing.
Yeah.
So that's where I looked for it. I went to where I knew the seam was, right? Because that's where the seam is. This one hardly has any artifact, right? Just same kind of thing, tiny little bit right at that point. So then what I did, if I it's actually going to blow them away. So if I'm going to load the Mosaic project. I know we're running long here, so sorry about that. So if I open this, it's going to blow that image away, but we'll pull that image up. So let's see, Mosaic. Get out of the way. So this is now 2.2 gig. That file that you just saw is 2 gig.
That's
And you can see
RGB. Each
you
one's
can
32 bits, each channel, right?
yeah,
Yeah, it's huge.
it's huge. Yeah. You can see here I have you can get rid of that. You can see here I have additional icons now because this is now what I did to the Mosaic image. This is like the earlier stuff, right, of each of the individual images. And now I have the Mosaic. So the first thing I did was I said, how much do I need to rotate that in order to not lose a lot of space? Because if I crop it like that, I'm going to lose way too much space. So 2.5 degrees was the right amount. So if I rotate that 2.5 degrees counterclockwise, I'll lose a lot less when I crop it. Then I did a dynamic crop. So I came in and I got kind of as much as possible out of that. Oops. So that's about as much as I can get out of that. Something like that will get rid of that artifact. And then I took that, I plate solved that, because now it's a new image, right? I cropped it, so I changed the astrometric solution. I plate solved that. And then on this one, I did a little unsharp mask. And I'll show you the extent of what that was. So if you look at something like that, that's how subtle. It's a tiny, tiny bit. Just to crispin it up a little bit. So amount 32% of one of a not a lot. Like this is like if you know, like you see stuff like this sometimes, right? Where it's it's really, really cranked up.
Overcooked.
Overcooked. Like way overcooked. So that compared to that, you can barely see the difference, but it makes a difference.
Yeah, a
So
little more contrast.
I'm sorry, say again.
No, it pulls out a little more contrast in the dark areas. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So if you go back and now unsharp mask, very, very subtle. Because really what I'm concerned about here is noise. Unsharp mask will increase noise. So, my main thing is to try to keep it so that I don't have to run another like deconvolution or there's a thing called TGV denoise in PixInsight, which works really, really well, but it will it'll sharpen, it'll get rid of the noise, but it'll also soften the image. So you're always playing against going too much and introducing noise to the point if you have to do noise reduction, you're going to soften the image. So what was the point of making it sharper in the beginning? That's why I've said this many times, like less is better. So now black point. If I look at that histogram, I still have plenty of room on that black side, right? On that dark side. So another black point adjustment. And we wind up with that. And then curves. Now look how subtle this one is. All I'm doing here is pulling up. If I go to this region, I'm pulling up those highlights a tiny bit. I have a double control point here. And here I have a single control point because I wanted a little bit of reduction in that. I'll get rid of that. And I'm pulling up a little bit of that. See that overall brightness coming up? Just to bring up that nebulosity a tiny, tiny bit. I'll just get rid of that since I changed it. And I'll execute that. So a tiny curves adjustment. And then here, what I did was I actually did do a very subtle saturation curve because I wanted to pull up the reds and the blues, but I didn't want to pull up the greens. So if you see the difference here, the tiny bit, right? You can see the slight increase in saturation on, off, on, off, without going overboard. Most of the time I won't do that. This is probably one of my least used things is color saturation. It's rare for me to boost the saturation. I wanted this to get a little bit more pop. And then you notice that they're still picking up some green hue. And I wound up doing this one more time. That's very unusual for me to do another SCNR. In fact, I'm not even sure this one mattered. Because when I went back and forth, I couldn't really, it's subtle. It's a tiny bit if you look in this region. I'm going to turn it on. You can see it pulls it a little more to the red, a little less towards the green. And that's the final image. That's it. Thank you, Brett.
Wow.
Now, according to YouTube, this is not the right way to do this. I'll run that experiment at some point, but because I'm curious, I'm very curious to see how well those other tools work. But the reason why I did this again is because I felt like I would be running blind if I just trusted some tool in the unstretched state to figure this image out and balance it. And I know it works because I mean, if I listen to Adam Block, that's how he does it. And if I listen to these gurus and this stuff, that's how they do it. So they know infinitely more than me. And that's how they do it. But again, the proof is in the pudding. This technique is not conventional if you consider the YouTube wisdom conventional wisdom, but you can't argue with, I don't feel you can argue with the results.
No, it's a great result.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful, Gary.
Thank you. So
Gosh.
that's it. Now I can put my thank you slide up.
Thank you. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Then if you annotate that,
Gary, you're gonna post that on the documents folder?
I will. Yeah, I'll send the link. I'll send where it is. It'll be in presentations folder, and I'll make a subfolder or something like that.
Okay.
So that's the annotated version.
Thank you for doing this, Gary.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, Gary. It was
You're
terrific.
welcome. That's it.
I know this was a lot of work to put it together. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Let me stop sharing. Cool. Hey, I can see everybody again.
Hey, guys.
Hey, man. You guys were real little. In fact, it was funny. I was trying to look at the screen because that's where the camera is, but I kept seeing your faces over there, and I kept turning my head to kind of talk to your faces. So cool. Well, thanks again for everyone for attending. I'm sorry for running a little long, but it is you know, it's 4 panels. It's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought it was important to also show the playing with the curves and playing with that stuff, because that to me is where sort of the magic is.
Well,
Yeah.
even if you did it backwards, it came. Don't listen to anybody to say you did it wrong. You did it right, as far as I'm concerned.
It was really weird after the fact, listening to those YouTube videos, and it's like, oh geez, I guess I should have done this first. I should have listened to these first. But
You know, it's a lot of work, but it would be interesting to see if the results would be worse. The thing, you know, why you probably got away with it backwards, because the data was from Cherry Springs. You know, and there's not that much of a gradient in each individual panel. But the gradient merge Mosaic really does a great job of blending.
it does. It's really impressive. I was blown away. I was expecting, well, I mean, even if you look at I'm sorry, let me just share one thing again. Hold on. So even if you look at like what is that? Is that a So what I did was I just took the luminance of the starless images, and this is the combined image, and I took a starless version of this, luminance only, to see if I could see anything, because this was a test of how well the backgrounds were matched.
Yeah.
Mm.
And there's like nothing there. You can't see anything where those seams are. This is the star image.
That's perfect.
It's amazing with even with slightly different curves that like the four panels seem balanced as well. I don't see any like big gradients or anything.
Yeah.
Correct. And I think part of that is because I once I did the combination, then I could really see there was a difference. And on one, I had to adjust the black point a little bit. I just had to pull it. It was just a little too bright.
Yeah.
So I just literally had one image open as a reference. I picked one as a reference and I took the other ones and I just compared it to it. I just slid it next to it and said, how does it look? And one looked a little too bright. So I moved the black point over a tiny bit, that one that had the black point adjustment.
Yeah.
And then it looked the same. And then I thought, okay,
Yeah.
it looks the same. It's going to blend the same.
Yeah.
So that's all I did. I just used one as a reference and then,
Just normalize it. Yeah.
yeah. So
All right.
anyway,
The next one we have is on Tuesday. Mark Ferrari is going to show us how we used processed the North American Nebula with a dual, the Optolong dual band filter with his not his mono, his one-shot color camera. So he was telling me that it's HA and O3 data, and even with the moon out, he could take the collect data, and there was no issue. So
yeah.
I'm interested to. I've never done narrow band with my one-shot color with two different channels, so I'm curious how that will turn out.
Yeah, those early Veil ones that I took at Blue Mountain were shot that way.
Gary,
Just not mapped to a false color.
I'm wondering, Gary, if you use like narrow band images, if it might be easier. You won't have to worry about gradients, right? Then
No, I think you will. You'd still have gradients.
I will light
It's in,
pollution.
it's in the black. I mean, the gradients is the background.
Yeah.
Worry about the light pollution gradient though, I mean, because they pretty much cut that out.
It'll cut out that. It'll be less gradients, but
Yeah.
you'll still have sky gradient.
Yeah, I'm curious if that would be how much more helpful that would be with mosaics. But
It couldn't hurt, other than that, you're not getting that true color. If you wanted a true color kind of image, you wouldn't shoot it with the narrow band. But
right.
it works great. I mean, I've shot a lot of stuff with the dual narrow band with the one shot color. And like the heart and soul that I did, those were shot that way. And the moon, I mean, the moon was out. The moon was like first quarter, third quarter. I don't think I've done one with the full moon, but you probably could. You probably could get away with it. They work quite well.
Yeah, I'm wondering why that works because the moonlight is just reflected sun. So I mean, it's interesting that work.
I mean, you don't pick an object next to the moon,
Yeah.
right? So the moon's out, so you're getting more of a sky. I think you get more of a sky gradient than the direct light pollution from the moon when you do that. But I was surprised how much moon you can have and still have a good image. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm curious to hear that talk too.
Yeah. All right. So that's Tuesday, guys, at same time, same channel. And then if anybody wants to do comment processing next month, let me know or let John know, and we could set that up. We have a lot of stuff. And then in December we have Agapios coming to do what is it, Saturn and Mars, I think, or is it Jupiter and Mars? I don't know which. Two of the three planets.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
they're all up. Maybe if he's doing it the same night, it might be Jupiter and Mars. They're closer to one another.
Right. All right. So we have a lot planned this fall.
I'll hopefully see some of y'all at the general meeting tomorrow. So
All
Sounds
right.
good. Good night, everybody.
yeah, thanks so
Bye,
much.
everybody.
Again, Gary.
Is anybody going to be at the general meeting? Gary, are you going to be there?